and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I am Angela Yeager. I am happy to be joined once again by guest host Nathaniel Dunaway. Welcome, Nathaniel.
Hi, Angela. Thank you for having me on yet again.
Yet again, you're pretty much like almost a regular guest host at this point. Hopefully, we can continue to have you as a guest host in your new ventures in life.
I would love
Um, I'm super excited to have you on for this episode. This is one we dreamed up because we're both fans of horror films, and there were a lot that we didn't get a chance to review in 2020 that came out that kind of fell under the radar. I think partially because theaters being closed, and to me at least, horror is such a great theater experience. The experience of watching in a dark, crowded room with a bunch of people and hearing, people gasp or scream, or you don't get screaming too often, but even sensing people tense up in a theater. To me, horror films are a great theatrical experience. And so unfortunately, we missed that in 2020. But some interesting horror movies still came out. So we decided to look at some of the underrated horror movies that that we didn't get a chance to talk about in previous episodes. So I'm going to kick it off with our first movie. This is His House, which is on Netflix. And this is about a refugee couple from Sudan who begin to suspect their house in England has a sinister force within it. Um, Now, this film was one that I was super excited to review because the critics were just going gaga for it. And then I had never even seen it on Netflix. It wasn't something they were recommending to me. It wasn't popping up in my, new or trending or anything. And then I watched it and I was just absolutely blown away. I'll say it right off the bat that this is my favorite of the films we're going to review on this episode. There's a couple things they do really well. They use the immigrant refugee experience as this catalyst to explore psychological horror, trauma, PTSD, all these things that I mean, this couple, who are just they really establish their characters right off the bat. I think in a really great way, so that the rest of the movie you really empathize with them and are rooting for them. And they have undergone such trauma and horror from escaping from Sudan and then the boat ride over, which we get in flashbacks, which was absolutely horrific, to trying to escape to England. Then they get to England and they're told, okay, you have this house, you have to stay in the house, you can't work, you can't do anything. If you screw up even once on anything, we're sending you back. And they know that what they'd be going back to is absolutely horrific, right? So we've got this great setup. And then all these things start to happen in this house. And one of the things as a viewer that I thought was really compelling is we don't know what's real and what's not, how much of this is imagined horror versus things are, is there really, because it looks just like a kind of a basic, you know, England kind of gray, flat type place. There's nothing particularly. It's not like a spooky old house movie, like The Conjuring or something. It's just like a really basic looking house. So I really loved this film. Curious to hear what you thought.
I thought this movie was great. I was pretty much blown away from, the opening scene. All the best horror movies are they're doing something else other than trying to scare you, that they're saying something, they're commenting on something. And this one is definitely doing that. This movie definitely has a viewpoint. It's definitely making a comment about the refugee experience. Um, it's always really impressive when a movie is able to balance, real world horrors with these more, psychological or supernatural. Because you almost are more comfortable as a viewer watching ghosts and spiritual hauntings than you are with these interactions that characters are having with, you know, real life xenophobia and racism and just the antagonism that they face as refugees. They're
Right.
leaving something completely horrible, and trying to make a better lives for themselves, and um, the adversity that they face once they're in England, is really, really difficult to watch. And that it's 100% accurate to what these people do experience. Um, yeah, I thought this movie was really, really gutsy in some of the things that it talked about, but also just in the kind of scares that are in it. I feel like I don't want to give anything away, obviously, but in sort of the climax of this movie, it goes in a direction that um I wish more movies had the guts to do. I feel
Mm,
like it completely leans into sort of the haunting story that it wants to tell. It doesn't leave things ambiguous like a lot of movies do
right.
nowadays
Right. It
that are
actually
sort of
does show
towing
you
this
what's
line.
happening. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, which a lot of
Right.
do, and the one we're going
Yes.
to
Yeah.
review later definitely goes in the more ambiguous route, where at the end you're like, okay, so did you want to finish the story or what? So, this one they, it does wrap
Right.
everything around. And you're right. I think the horror in the movie, there's multiple layers of horror. It's almost like, okay, is the scary witch that's coming out of the walls, is that scarier than when they leave the house? Like she goes on that walk and she gets a little lost trying to find the doctor's office because she needs to go and check in at a doctor.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden she's surrounded by these kind of thug guys who are harassing her. And I was like, almost more tense in that scene than I was with anything scary happening in the house, because they're very vulnerable. They're in this community where they're obviously not wanted and where they're told any false move you make, you're going to get sent back to your country. And so they're kind of like, they don't know anybody. And they've put them in this really weird big house, which was another thing right off the bat. They were even expecting, based on what they know from other refugees, oh, we're not going to be in some small crowded apartment with a bunch of other refugees. Nope, this is the one we happen to have. And it's gigantic for just two people. And it was, a little bit odd. And then we find out something midway through the film about what has happened to their daughter that I don't want to give away, but that's really obviously traumatizing and shocking, and also gives another layer to the characters that even though they're overall good people, they came from a place where people sometimes had to do bad things in order to survive. And we get that perspective as well. And those traumas and those horrors of what you've done to survive in Sudan are coming back to haunt you as well. And so there was just multiple layers. I would almost call this, I mean, it is horror, but it's psychological horror. I think you're right. Like a lot of great horror films, whether that's The Exorcist or Get Out or Rosemary's Baby, it's about more than just jump scares. That's not really what this is going for.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And this one, it is, you use the word trauma. It is very much a movie about trauma and that trauma that these characters have to carry with them, and the fact that they can't just have that trauma and try to process it, but that trauma is being added to, always.
Right. It's just an
So that,
amazing
I mean, that
film.
makes it, yeah, that makes it sound like a real downer, and it's not a, uplifting movie, but I don't think it's the most depressing movie on, this list of movies we're reviewing today. I do think it's the one with the most, I guess, payoff. I think,
Hmm.
you're going into this movie and you might think it's going to go one way and it goes a different direction, and it definitely pays off in the end.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic movie. If we had seen this earlier, it would have made my top 10 of 2020 list. There's no doubt in my mind.
Agreed.
It's just fantastic. And what Netflix did to bury this movie is unconscionable in my opinion. They should have been promoting this. I mean, they've been putting out Fear Street and stuff like that. This is a horror movie they should have been promoting big time. And a feature debut. Remi Weeks had done some shorts. This is his first time feature, which is just amazing. It says I didn't even get into the photography and how fantastic the photography is and his use of all the shadows in the house and just so many great atmospheric moments. So can't say enough about that one. Definitely a 4-star movie for me.
Agreed. 4 stars.
Okay, so we'll move on to something very different.
Very different. Yes. Our next horror movie of 2020 is Freaky, um, which was directed by Christopher Landon and stars Vince Vaughn and Catherine Newton, and is essentially the story of a high school student who's, kind of an unpopular girl at the school, and through um, through some supernatural means that we don't need to get into, she switches bodies with a serial killer played by Vince Vaughn. So the movie stars Vince Vaughn, but he's not playing the serial killer. He's playing the teenage girl, and vice versa. The teenage girl, Catherine Newton, is um, playing a serial killer. She's a serial killer is in her body. So it's Freaky Friday essentially. um, but as a slasher movie. And this is a very fun movie. Like you said, I mean, all of these movies I would have loved to have seen on the big screen. This one it is definitely the one that feels like, oh, this would have had a huge crowd if this had been able to play in, in movie
Yeah,
theaters.
this one would have been the most
This
fun, I
would
think,
have
to
been
see
a
in the
really,
theater.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean the main, this movie gets a lot of mileage out of Vince Vaughn being a teenage girl, which he's very good at, and I thought his performance was great. And it is, Christopher Landon also did um, the Happy Death Day movies, which I also thought were a lot of fun and were kind of a breath of fresh air for the slasher genre. They both of those movies did a lot of new things. I think Freaky adds a lot new to the slasher genre and sort of modernizes it a little bit. Has some characters that are a little bit more recognizable in 2021. But yeah, I thought this movie was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. I actually, at the beginning, I thought, oh gosh, Nathaniel, what have you got me watching? Because I was the Freaky Friday thing. I was just like, how many? There's so many ways they've done the whole body switching thing in movies. Like male, female, parents, siblings, animal to in soul, animal to human. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Now we have teenager girl and serial killer. Here's the new twist on the body switching. So first I was annoyed, and I was also annoyed because Catherine Newton's supposed to be this unpopular girl, and she looks like a freaking supermodel. She's like blonde and gorgeous, and I didn't think she was. I actually thought the people that were, the side characters, of course, are her, her two best friends are a gay guy and a black girl. So, and they were way more interesting than she was, but whatever. I guess she's just unpopular because her mom is, sort of poor or whatever. I don't know. That was silly. I was just trying
Right.
to put that aside. Vince Vaughn, though, plays it to the hilt as the teenage girl. I mean, he's going for the whole like, oh my gosh. And then there's, a really funny scene where he gets into the back seat of a car with the boy that, she's got a crush on. And it's supposed to be, I think, shocking because it's like, oh, it's a gay kiss or whatever. But I was more just like, oh, the age difference. It's gross. Like, Vince Vaughn's
Right.
really old to be kissing this guy. But Vince Vaughn's obviously having a lot of fun in it, playing a teenage girl. And as much as I almost didn't want to like this movie because of all the stereotypes and tropes, it's just so compellingly watchable. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, God, this would have been fun to see in a theater with a group of people just like hooting it up because it's silly and kind of campy. But Bloomhouse, when they're on, I mean, sometimes they just do horrible movies like that Fantasy Island one that came out a couple of years ago. But sometimes they really, they just know how to nail it in terms of the tone and just having a lot of fun. And the whole like setup, like you said, for how they switch bodies is just so silly, but it doesn't even matter once you get into the meat of it is really just seeing her playing this, badass serial killer, and then Vince Vaughn playing the teenage girl. I mean, that's really what it's all about. So definitely a fun one. I'm giving it 3 stars, so I can recommend it, despite my original hesitation as I was watching it. But like it just flew by. I was watching it, and I'm like, oh, it's over now. So I knew I kind of enjoyed it on a as much as I tried not to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is a very entertaining movie, and if you're wanting a horror comedy, we have a good balance today. It's like two of them are pretty heavy movies, and two of them are horror comedies. This is definitely the most accessible movie, I would say, of the four
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Although actually pretty gory in parts, actually, but like Blue Mouse does do that, but it's actually way gorier than his house, for instance, but a lot less disturbing. It's more gory in that kind of comedy slasher way where someone's going to get a knife in the eyeball and things like that. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I laugh as I say that, but it's done for such, it's just so silly. You have to laugh
Mhm.
as you're watching
Yeah.
it. So next one, I think, is yours also.
Yes, it is. The next one, The Wolf of Snow Hollow. This movie was written, directed, and stars Jim Cummings, who made a great movie a couple of years before called Thunder Road, in which he also plays a cop. Um, he stars in this film as a police officer in a very small, snowy, mountain town. I think it was Utah. Um, He's the son of the sheriff, played by the great Robert Forster. It's his last movie, Robert Forster's last
Which is
movie.
so wacky just on its own that this is Robert Forster's last movie. Sorry to interrupt, but that just
No, that's okay. Yeah. And yeah, this movie is a horror comedy about a small town that is experiencing um they're not sure what they're experiencing. They're experiencing a lot of murders, and no one's really sure if the murders are done by a person or if maybe there's a werewolf in the town. But people are turning up mutilated every night that there's a full moon, and it's essentially the story of Jim Cummings' character, um, his life falling apart as he's expected to, be the one to catch this killer, and he, doesn't have a great relationship with his teenage daughter. He doesn't have a great relationship with his dad, Robert Forster, and it's really the movie's really about him and sort of the way he's processing everything and the way he's not processing everything, and there's sort of these this murder mystery going on almost in the background of his character. um yeah, what'd you think?
This was a really interesting movie. I don't think I would have heard of this. I think you found this one, and then I found the cast really interesting as well. It's a great, like, independent horror film in a way. So I thought what was interesting is Jim Cummings' character in the movie is so unlikable in some ways. He's just this like bottle of anger. He's got so many anger issues. He's constantly yelling at his team, at the other police officers. He's blowing up his family, his dad, and then he's got this possible werewolf situation. And then no matter how many things point to it possibly be a werewolf, he's just like, there's no such things as werewolves. And then he blows up again. Then he's got this backstory of being a recovering alcoholic, which plays really heavily into the plot of the movie. And I love that when they actually take the time to give a character in a horror movie a backstory, because so often it's just like, very superficial characters often. So I liked that aspect of it as well. Actually, to me, one of the besides seeing Robert Forrester on the screen again, which was just delightful, also a little odd that this is his last movie. Um, the Ricky Lindholm, who plays the female detective, who's sort of his to balance. So she's the one who's really actually being thoughtful and calm and trying to, like, okay, balance out his just complete insanity as he starts to spiral throughout the film. She's just a great character actress. No one will know that name from when I say it, but as soon as she comes on screen, you'll be like, I've seen her in something. I looked her on IMDb and she's been like in 100 movies and she's not even, that old. So she's just one of these character actors that shows up in TV and movies constantly. And she lends this great kind of gravitas, which you need because otherwise the film kind of slips into just so much absurdity with what's going on because nobody is very good at solving crimes in this movie, including the main character. I mean, things are kind of right under his nose, but he's so focused on his own rage and his own issues with his dad and everything that's going on with him that he isn't really focused on solving the crime. It is odd. There's like bodies turning up, people are under pressure, but no one's actually really trying to solve the crime. It seems like. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I thought there was an interesting, it's definitely, it exaggerates everything, but it is an interesting story about, how the sort of PR around, you know, like high profile, like murder mystery
Hmm.
like this, like that you're almost doing more work to like pacify the public than you are investigating the crime, and it
Yeah,
really focuses on that because it's not a movie about people doing a whole lot of investigating,
detective
you know.
work now.
And it even has a very funny sort of like spin on the kind of common trope of the detective getting a bunch of books in the library and
Hmm.
poring over things to try and find something. Jim Cummings does that, and then really it felt like it was just a setup for the scene where he's then asleep and the librarian wakes him up and startles him really badly, which was a really funny scene.
Hmm.
um because
Yeah, there
nothing
was
else.
no other reason for it. He doesn't uncover anything. There's no
Right.
result of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
And
they're all like pretty terrible police force. I mean, with the exception of her character, she's trying to, but even she doesn't really uncover a lot.
right, and
Um,
it is thanks to her that like things eventually kind of go in a certain direction as far as the mystery goes, but it's not thanks to to Jim Cummings or his police work really. It's so yeah, it's just interesting movie, just kind of about small town and those different interactions, where everybody. There's a little bit of a comment on people not like there's a repeated line, about like this is why people hate the police, you know.
Hmm.
So
Which
it's
comes up
definitely,
several times.
yeah, it's definitely self-aware in that way about, you know, a lot of true crime. If you read a lot of true crime or listen to true crime podcasts, you'll sort of see this repeated thing where it's often not that the serial killer was like a a genius, it's just that it's always that there's like some incompetence in the police force or like different jurisdictions not communicating with each other. So I feel like there's also some commentary on that this could have been a lot easier to solve, but everybody's got their own petty problems, you know.
Right. And they keep going down the wrong path looking at different people. And at one point I kept thinking, well, how many people? I mean, this is a pretty small town. How many possible suspects could there be that fit this description? And they just kind of go after like they're just going down all these trails that lead up to nowhere. And then they do have the issue of the jurisdiction because at one point they say, well, do we need to bring in some additional help? Because we're just like local police. We're not equipped to deal with this. That
Right.
doesn't seem to ever really happen. So this is not a, the scenes are left with tons of evidence. I mean, there's no cleanup. Like you said, there's no, the killer is leaving a ton of evidence behind it every
Mhm.
single scene, and they're kind of all still like, what do we do? So it's, yeah, it's an interesting movie. I think I'm giving this one also 3 stars. It was definitely not my favorite of the ones we were reviewing, but I can. It is very interesting. I feel like in this day and age, when so much horror has been done, for someone to find something a different twist on it, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, this would make a good double feature with a 2021 horror comedy, Werewolves Within, two, wolf themed horror comedies set in, snowy small towns, and both very funny movies, but also both with, something to say. I think it's interesting that, the Wolf of Snow Hollow, is that the killer, or is that Jim Cummings, character? Because there's definitely, like you mentioned earlier, there's definite commentary on that sort of dual personality, what
Hmm.
alcoholics are like when they drink and when they're, being tempted to drink, that whole.
There's a little bit of, I thought of The Shining a little bit as his character starts to unravel. I thought of that
Definitely.
quite a bit actually, and he starts to change. I mean, he's not pleasant at the beginning of the movie, but he becomes really unpleasant as it goes on. And I actually had the thought for a while, and I think most viewers might have this thought, like, is he the killer? So there's different people you start to suspect because his anger issues are so bad. So
Mm.
yeah, I think I have not seen the other one you mentioned yet, but I'm curious as to whether the wolf is real or not in that one, but you probably can't tell me because maybe that's a surprise when you watch the movie.
Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you, but yeah, I would
Okay.
also give this 3. I really like the sort of absurd style of it. Um, yeah, I think most of its comedy works really well. I think mostly where it falls short is just in being a horror movie. It does have some scary sequences, but it this one's a little bit more difficult to classify as definitely horror.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on quickly to our next film. We have only a few minutes left, apparently. So I was waiting for the big wrap up, Brad, and we didn't get it. So Kindred is our last movie, and this is about after the sudden death of her boyfriend, mother to be Charlotte is taken in by her boyfriend's family in their gigantic estate in England, and the family may have evil intentions towards Charlotte and her unborn baby, with a little bit of a nod to Rosemary's Baby, but this film has, quite a different take on it. Fiona Shaw, the great actress, plays the mother-in-law who wants to keep Charlotte trapped in the house. Now, I was super excited going into this movie. I know it got mixed reviews, but I really wanted to see it. For honestly, this was one of the few movies I picked just based on the poster. I thought it looked really cool. Um, and this was one I'm really disappointed in. I actually am super curious to see what you thought, Nathaniel, but it starts so strong, and I thought, oh, there's so much potential here because you have this woman. They don't dwell too much on the racial difference, at least, quite a bit, but she's got this background of her mother had some psychological problems. She's not excited about this pregnancy, but then once her boyfriend suddenly passes, and then she's in this house, and then she's trapped. and she can't get out. I thought there's a lot of potential here. The film is very slow, and then very much different than the one we reviewed at the beginning of the show, His House. It just seems to go nowhere. And one of the things that was super frustrating for me, unlike a movie like Get Out, where the protagonist takes action, is the character of Charlotte is such a passive character. She just kind of like spends a lot of the movie like laying around and being angry. And I wanted it to turn into something else, maybe like that wedding dress movie that I can't remember the name of right now, where she kind of takes control of her situation or something more. I wanted something
Right.
more to happen, but everything was just kind of, and so I can't recommend this one actually.
Yeah, I know specific people in my life who I think would really like this movie, who I would recommend too. But unlike the other three, which I would say, if those sound interesting, go for it. This one is harder to recommend. I definitely agree. I'd probably give it like a 2.5 out of 4.
Yeah.
I think the acting was great.
Yeah, the acting's
Um,
great.
but yeah, unlike His House, which also starts out like with a really strong premise and is a little bit slow in the middle and you're not sure where things are going to go. This movie doesn't have a payoff, and which might be a spoiler, but I just feel like if you're halfway through and you're not sure if you're liking
Right.
this movie, you're probably not going to like where it goes. It's a
I
movie very
know.
much, it's a lot of it's about gaslighting. A lot of it is about women feeling powerless and these powers that control them, but it doesn't actually go in much of a direction with any of that. um
Yeah. So yeah, I know, and it was really disappointing. So I would recommend it. I don't know, maybe to some people, but like you said, the middle section is slow, and then it doesn't really pay off to anything else. And there was so much potential. It actually like, oh, I almost want someone to remake this one because I feel like the premise has a lot of potential for a great, great
I think
psychological.
there's small stuff in there. I think the visuals are great. I really like the bird imagery.
Yeah, the house
Um,
itself is a great
yeah,
setting for a horror movie.
yeah, and
So
then
yeah.
yeah, but unfortunately, it doesn't do much with all of those good aspects.
Well, thank you again, Nathaniel, for being on the show. I hope you join me again, even from your new location. So, I think they have internet in Central Oregon, though, last time I checked. So, should be
Yeah,
able to do it.
I think they just got it over
They
there.
just
So
got
yeah,
it this year, right? So,
I would love to be on again. Yeah.
great. Thank you for joining me. As always, check out realfilmsnobs.com. We're on Twitter and Facebook, CC Media, Scan TV, Corvallis Access Media, KMUZ Radio, and KMWV Radio. As always, thank you to our fantastic sponsors, our crew in absentia, and Brad Wortman for taping us. Thank you to Nathaniel for joining me. Have a great day and great movies. Bye.